Welcome, everybody. Um, this is a conversation that is part of our Sharing the Path Salon series, and Scott will be our presenter to kind of kick off the conversation. Um, and I'm going to start us off with meditation and prayer, and then I'm going to give us a little context for the culture of these calls. And then Kent is going to give us a little intro to Scott. And Scott's going to present on the topic to kind of stimulate the conversation. And then we'll go from there. And we have scheduled 90 minutes for the call. Any questions before we begin? Cool.
Nope, we're all
Okay.
good.
Well, let's settle in then. Let's settle in and allow ourselves to get present. And just for a few moments, let the past go. Let the future go. And just find yourself here and now. On this Zoom call with friends. Let's allow yourself to get really still and present. And as this series is a practice in hearing one another, a practice in shared discourse, let's invite in support. Invite the support of our allies, guardians, angels, guides. Friends, thank you for being with us. Thank you for surrounding us. Thank you for supporting our time together to be beneficial, both to those gathered here as well as those who may be touched after this conversation. Thank you for supporting our walks in this lifetime. To prioritize the open-hearted path, balancing. And thank you, as always, to the one infinite creator, the beginning and the end. Amen. Okay, so a reminder of the cultural context for these calls. We're aiming to practice discourse with one another and practicing listening deeply to engage in learn teaching and teach learning so that we can really hear one another and listen for resonance. The invitation is to listen for what truth might be sparked in yourself by your other selves. And in that way, we're also invited to share humbly from our own direct experience so that our other selves can learn from us. So, to listen generously and share generously, and then also to honor one another's free will. So where there may not be resonance, where there may be a difference of perspective, we're not aiming to convince anyone of anything. So including Scott, who's coming in with a perspective to present on, like, the aim is not for us to all then leave this conversation like having taken in Scott's words as though they're true. They may resonate as true for us, of course. But the invitation is always, of course, to use your own filter, use your own sense making, and honor your own truth and the truth of others. If something is true for them that does not resonate for you, let that be the case. Yes. Okay. I think that's my part.
Yeah, that's great, West. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I introduced Scott for his last presentation about a month ago. So I'll do a shorter version of it this time. So West and I first met Scott at the Philadelphia Coming Home last September. And it's funny, when he walked in the meeting room, I immediately recognized him. And I had to look at him for a little bit to decide if I knew him from this lifetime or not. And, after a few seconds of looking at him, I realized I'd never met him before in this lifetime. But he's definitely somebody I've known before. Anyway, the three of us are gonna see each other again in Colorado in a couple of weeks. That should be a lot of fun. And Aaron just joined us. Welcome, Aaron. He's muted. Scott, when he was young, he wanted to be an astronaut. And he learned that to become an astronaut, the best path was to first become a pilot. So he joined the Air Force to become a pilot so that he could become an astronaut. But then he talked to some actual astronauts and found out that they weren't doing much at the moment, so he gave up on that. He now works as a test pilot for Gulfstream Aerospace. And so he flies a lot, flies across the Atlantic a lot. Sounds exciting. He comes from a Catholic background. He was a practicing Catholic in his 20s and into his early 30s when he finally gave up on that. And about 10 years ago, he had what he describes as a non-ordinary experience of no separation. And that brought him to a new spiritual awakening. And he began to look for new spiritual material to study. And he soon found the Law of One material in 2015. And the rest is history, as they say. Anyway, he's judging from the conversations we have on Telegram. He probably reads more books than anybody I know, or so it seems, because he always gives us book references. He has studied a lot about the STS polarity, which is of great interest to him, to understand how they work. But this time he's going to talk about something else, which is judgments. And I'm very excited about that. It's one of my favorite topics. So, Scott, go ahead. Let us have your presentation.
Okay. Thanks, West and Kent, for the introduction. And I'm waiting for this thing to, oh no, it's waiting for me. Okay. So the last time I presented, I think it was in February, something like that, near the end of the conversation, somebody brought up the idea of, or the concept of judgment, and of course we were talking about service to self and how easy it is. Matter of fact, I was with a group of people this afternoon, and a couple of them went on a little mild-mannered, but nonetheless a rant about, how evil some people are in the world and how much evil exists. And it reminded me of that conversation. And then what we are doing here is, okay, judgment. They were judging something as evil, and it's difficult to disagree with them. But what is the judgment? What does it do to the individual? What does it do to the other? What does it do to humanity? And why, in session 94, in answer to a question about Carla's self-assessment of how effective she was as the instrument, Ross suggested that she contemplate the non-efficacy of judgment. And you guys all do the same thing. You've got how many hundreds of thousands of words in all those questions and answers, and every now and then there'll be one that pops up all the time. And I maybe more than one, to be fair, but in any case, that was one that just stuck with me, resonated with me from the word go. And so, without further ado, I'm going to reiterate what West said. Okay, don't take my word for it. I've spent a lot of time, especially in the last 2 months, contemplating this and watching the reactions both within myself, within others, when it gets sticky. Because am I judging whether or not judgment is occurring? In any case, it's personal experience that you're going to hear me talk about here, and there's going to be a lot of doodling and things like that. Hopefully, you guys will pipe in and join me. But I don't know anything, and the more I think I know, the less I know, because it just gets more confusing and more complicated. The one thing I will ask, that in addition to making a choice of whether or not this resonates with you, I will challenge you to question your beliefs, and look for things that disprove what you want to believe or what you think you believe, not for confirmation. That's usually the path we go on, and we can get into I guess dead ends is what I mean. And look for the presumptions, assumptions, and and anything else that underlies the way you think the world works. And in my personal experience, going towards where it seems most fearful is the most beneficial. Universe likes the bold. I've heard it on good authority that this statement here is why we're here on planet Earth. And so I'll keep coming back to that as we start our doodling. But first, some basic definitions. I'll go through those, and well, you'll see. And then how does this, if at all, relate to the veil, and does, or maintaining the veil? We'll see what you'll get my thoughts on that. And then as well, within the veil, self versus other, and where we draw the line. And then when I get to the doodles, we'll talk about what I see as the consequences of various thoughts that we have about people, events, activities, timelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then concurrently run through some of the alternatives. I don't like when people read long things to me, so I'll just give it a minute here of quiet, and then maybe point out a couple of things. But these are some famous quotes, some more famous than others. All right, so the first one is the excerpt from session 94 that always comes back to me. The second one, very famous statement from the Sermon on the Mount. and basically repeated in the third one, and then the fourth one from the Old Testament in the Proverbs. And the point of the the point of the first one is, to me, are you hurting yourself or helping yourself when you reflect on yourself, when you reflect on your activities and your deeds? The second two are basically two ways of saying that the world outside of you is a mirror. So whatever you think of it, you think of yourself. It gets back to the quote I had on the with the black background on the first page. And then the next one is, how can you ever know in this third density experiences that you're ever right about anything? Keep in mind all relationships, all events, all activities, anything that occurs on what appears to be outside of us is a neutral catalyst that we then apply meaning to based on all of our experience and history and biases and resonances. I like these cards. I use them all the time. So we're not going to get into how the veil happens, where we're going to just take it as granted here. And there's a lot of discussion, a lot of effort to trying to see beyond the veil, and how does judgment tie to our success on doing that, and whether it's desirable or necessary. All right, so that's kind of the background of where I hope we'll go with this, and hope you and I'll give you guys plenty of time to join the discussion here because I think we're about halfway through already. So I looked up the word judgment in Merriam-Webster, and I didn't want to take time to go through. There were 5 or 6 different things, but they were all very closely tied to, let me just say in general, the legal system or the justice system or judges on a bench rather than judging in your personal life the right or wrong or good or bad of something. And I was kind of disappointed in that. And I even went to look at synonyms, and it really didn't expand any further beyond that. So I kind of wrote my own the thesaurus here on the left. And I'm not going to read them to you, but the idea of this list is at the top is a very innocuous, neutral type of A or B. Pick one. And then as you go down the list, it starts to get more loaded with meaning. And when and of course, when it gets loaded to meaning, because of the duality, the polarity of everything, it could go towards, let me just call it the light side and the dark side, to use the Star Wars metaphor. Okay. And then some of those, like condemnation, is clearly a negative thought pattern. Discrimination, I'll give you a couple examples of that. When you pick a life partner, you're probably discriminating, but it's not in an effort to exclude somebody from anything. Well, I guess it is, but it's more of like, well, I choose this one because it's a better match for me from what I can tell now. Anyway, I think you get the idea there with discrimination. It's a loaded word in modern American culture, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. Righteousness and self-righteousness, the way I think they're used in the Western tradition is trying to think the way that the Creator wants you to think, starting with the I am that I am. And the quote unquote right way is whatever resonates with you in the end. Obviously, the New Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, he's trying to lead people towards service to others. Jesus is, but even that one becomes a very thin line between righteousness of I've chosen the path that's right for me versus self-righteousness, where you start to create that hierarchy of I'm better than the other, or I'm smarter than the other, or I know more than the other, and they should do what I tell them to do, because that can lead down a dark path really, really quickly. Okay. So with that, I guess, linear progression in mind, I wrote down some questions here. And the first one of these definitions, are there any that might create some separation between you and another, or within your own personal experience, whether the personality, relationships with others? If if you're trying to use one of these, or what you think is, I'll use the word choice, but to generalize all of them rather than judgment. But if you have a strong emotion like fear while you're trying to do that, does that affect the choice? I kind of gave away what I was thinking about in the next one, subjugation. That boils down to the condemnation and self-righteousness. But there's a lot more we can unpack there. And if I can turn something into less than I am, like dehumanize another third density entity, what does that do to me or for me? What motivates that? Why would I do that? Or why would I want to avoid that? So those were, let me just call those the thought patterns that I was going through. And I am, in the meantime, going to switch my app, and I'm going to draw some pictures, if you don't mind. Actually, I'm gonna give you a preview here where I think we're headed. Okay, memorize all that. Just kidding.
No, I got it memorized.
Okay, all right. Well, you can help me out then, Kent.
Yeah, right.
So,
I'm gonna mute it. I'm gonna mute mine because somebody's driving a motorcycle outside here.
okay, I have a little creator up here, and of course, we're contained within all of our little creator, big creator. It's both big and little. That's kind of the mystery of it all. And from that, you get this little tiny sunbeam that becomes the created. And I'm just gonna, okay, that's what we have.
We're so
So,
cute.
yeah. Well, thanks. He's got like four hairs of head left on his head. Okay, so I'm gonna call that guy a self. Okay, and somewhere along the line, he or she or whatever it thinks it is. I'm gonna use he because that's what I think I am. And he decides that he's in a world and it's outside of him. Okay. So wait, I just used that word decision, didn't I? Isn't that weird?
Hmm.
Okay. And we start doing that and we start creating language within hours of being born. I watched it in my own kids. So when I make this decision of, it's a basic decision of me and not me. Okay. So what do I get? That look like the word other to you guys?
Yes.
Okay. So what did I just do? I just created a separation. Okay. And all I did was decide that um, that diaper is not me, for example, or that swinging thing in the crib is not me. Okay, or on through the whole stage of life, you're constantly deciding what is you and what is not you. And to me, what motivates that is, or what immediately follows that, is this thing called survival. Okay, we want the self to survive, so we need to make the very next decision, which is it a friend or is it a foe? Okay, so is that a discernment? Is it a judgment? Okay, so far there's not really anything that you would remotely call a moral judgment, or nothing as sophisticated as, do I put my priority on protecting the self and excluding everything else, or expanding what I identify as myself and then the other gets smaller, which is what you would think of as a more mature service to other type of operator, because we want it all to side, not necessarily the entities, but the whole thing. If it's foe, what do I get? I get some fear. Okay. As I get as I grow up and start to develop mature and therefore more complicated relationships, do I call it evil or good or correct? The STS, I'm thinking, it's not evil. It's what needs to be done because there's too much chaos out there and I need to control it all. Okay. We'll come back to this one a little bit. Um, Another thing over here is, maybe it's not something that I see as an immediate threat to my survival, but maybe I just don't like it. I have personal preferences. I don't like chocolate ice cream. Okay. So I reject it. Okay. Of course, the opposite of that would be to prefer something and to draw it in towards me. So attraction, maybe because it's helpful, or I identify that it's like me, so it's familiar. I won't write. So those are just things to kind of get started with on the other side, because there's a lot going on and it's literally nonstop. And it starts with that whole friend or foe thing. That's the most fundamental. That's red ray kind of thinking, basically reptilian brain, in my opinion, of always making assessment. And it's not always a physical. As a matter of fact, in the modern 21st century America, well, very little of it actually turns into is a physical thought of friend or foe. It's a social one. Okay, because we associate social survival with ultimately the physical survival, or really the survival of the self. All right, so it looks like, let me change my colors here for a second. I've kind of drawn this. Oh, that's not blue. Okay. I've drawn this line, and I don't think have anything like judgment quite yet. It's just in many cases arbitrary. Actually, in almost all cases, this is me and that's not. Okay. And then when I come back to the later to the things like condemnation and judgment, we'll see what it does on either sides of the line here. Okay. So over here, we do still have the like and the dislike. A lot of the same decisions or judgments or discernments can be made about the self, as they can about others. And there can be parts of me that I don't like. There's parts of me that I want to um, amplify because I think it'll make other people like me, and that gets into that social survival thing again. Okay, so uh, I amplify things that I prefer about me, or I have this self-image. Okay, so that self-image usually changes over time because of a self-assessment. Ooh, I didn't put that one on that other list, did I? All right. Well, self-assessment. Let's see what happens. Um, if I'm worthy, or I think I'm complete, or God forbid, I think I'm better than anybody else, or whatever it is that'll make me feel good about myself, then it it's going to get me closer to that creator up there. Okay. Versus if I start to feel unworthy, okay, or inadequate. Did I just judge myself?
Say that was about you.
Well, can I judge myself? Is that
Oh, that's what you're
self-assessment?
asking. That's what you're
Is it,
asking. Yes.
yeah, wait, so let's pick a trait, okay? Impatience. I assess myself as leaning towards impatience. Okay. So that might be an assessment without a whole lot of baggage on it. But if I decide that, well, I'm surrounded by incompetent people and they're not learning, they're not doing their job, blah blah blah, in a distorted kind of way, I'm putting myself up here on this worthy side, but I'm separating myself from these other selves in a hierarchical type of way. Versus if I'm like, man, I'm just irritating, I'm pissing everybody off. Maybe maybe I should stop that. And in the meantime, the next time I do it, I'm going to put myself down here in this. I'm going to judge myself, okay, as unworthy. Or maybe there was a goal or a task. I was on a team and the big project at work, and everybody was counting on me to get my part done. And I either didn't get it done on time or didn't do it well enough or whatever it is. And I had personally identified that as part of me, that job. It happens all the time in our adult lives. Now I've just judged myself, and that unworthiness takes me in the opposite direction of that creator, doesn't it? At least in my opinion, it does. Okay. So what I've just done here, in the interest of time, you guys can do more of this contemplation, come up with personal examples. But I'm just going to draw one line, and it's not an either or there's not a blue line or a black line between a good self-assessment or a bad self-assessment or an appropriate or inappropriate or helpful or unhelpful. Um, it's just the idea that I got my creator dude up there, and he's kind of caught. Well, he's not separate from this anyway. He's certainly the way I drew this is not separate from it. But the idea is I can get myself closer to the creator or further from the creator, depend on these choices, discernments, judgments that I have. Okay, and you can do other things like come up with a different color here. How about true and not true? Okay. That thing, I can put the stuff in the green anywhere on this whole page because at its at its outset, it doesn't have any any separation within or without the creator. It's just, do I believe it or do I not believe it? Now that has knock-on effects downstream. Okay. So the next question, and I'm getting near the end here, is it even possible to avoid this kind of stuff? Say, for example, let me go back over to this evil down here, to use New Testament Christian references again. I'll write down this word. Okay. I just wrote it down there at the bottom because it's next to the word evil, which is how it's portrayed at least in the Catholic Catechism. But what would have happened to the story if not only Judas, but nobody was the traitor? So he did something that most people think was absolutely reprehensible and abhorrent, including himself. But it led to an outcome where the martyrdom of Jesus made him a household name two millennia later. So did he help or did he hurt? So this is all those words I had on the previous slide there. Which one are we using here and why? Okay. And I'll write down one more word after I spell it right. Okay. That one's, to me, an unambiguous word. It definitely means that if in the earlier discussion where I started out with friend or foe, uh, with that fight or flight survival thing, that's definitely something I wouldn't call a friend a traitor. Maybe I'd call a former friend. Well, if I call an individual entity a traitor, then he's no longer a friend, probably. Okay, that's why I think that there's not much ambiguity in that word. But in the stories, the parables, it's very confusing. And you can take anything out of it you want. So where I want to go next is there anything that puts the brakes on this or helps us decrease this separation either between ourself and others or between the self other and the creator? Um, there was a word that came up again in uh, I forgot how many times it was mentioned, but it was the salvation of third density. So some of you probably remember that word. I'm going to go ahead and write it down here. You know what? I could put this over here too. The idea I'm trying to get here is that compassion, this thing you could keep making little decisions, judgments, uh, discernments, discriminations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and get further and further away from the middle of this thing where I started with a self. And it was just decision as, oh, that's a hand, that's part of me. You know what I mean? And compassion is kind of creates the bumpers or the padded cell, if you will, because that's where we are anyway. We're all crazy people. And that's what I got out of this study I've been doing with how compassion stops or it puts a boundary on how far away from a center you can go. And it's like, okay, I get it. Ra always talked about, like I said, the quote was, compassion is the salvation of third density. And then if you go read some of the New Testament, the gospel stories, one of the most common phrases is he became filled with compassion when they were talking about the Jesus entity. They'd be wandering around doing whatever, and he would stumble upon whatever story that's in there, and one of the first things that happened, he was filled with compassion. And then you have to go look at the character for whom he was filled with compassion. And that was the first step to stopping all of this separation and further removal of the self from the self by the self, and therefore from the creator. So the good news is, well, I don't want to say if it's bad news, but the challenge is that our thoughts can take us very, very far away from where we might want to be in every aspect of our lives, your personal day-to-day routine, your personality, your close relationships, your um, more remote relationships, your work environment, your living environment, your economic environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And victimhood becomes part of that too. And so the last thought I want to throw out there is there any way to short circuit or stop the whole thing? And yeah, there were clues again in the raw contact as well as in really every metaphysical and spiritual tradition. Unconditional forgiveness, when I sit down and think about that and think of times when I've tried to use it and times when I think I was successful at it, it completely obliterates it's like none of, okay, it's like none of this ever happened. It's, to me, it's the reciprocal. And to use a math term here, forgiveness is one over, is reciprocal is not the opposite or necessarily the inverse, it's the reciprocal. So the more forgiveness you have, the less judgment you have. I'm using American spelling there. Because you can create all these rabbit holes in your life, and then if you go and forgive it and basically turn it into something that it never really even happened, I mean, go that far into forgiveness, then there was no self or other, there was no separation. It was just a happening. It was just an event that happened. Did I lose you guys?
No, we're all here.
Okay, good. And you can still see my screen, right?
Yes. Well, we see you now. We don't
Yeah,
see the whiteboard.
the whiteboard went away.
That's what I thought happened. Okay. Um, share. I think my pen went a little rogue on me, and I might have touched the turn off sharing. All right, I don't think I wrote anything else down, but
Yeah, I think we saw it right up to the end.
okay.
Yeah.
So we can come back to that as we need. But when I contemplate this, and within the context of this discussion within myself and with all of you of judgment, then I see no choice but at some point to forgive. Otherwise, it just keeps going around and around with more and more rabbit holes, and pretty soon you got a whole prairie full of prairie dogs and 800 different holes, and every one of them is full of judgments. And it eventually, in my experience anyway, even something an innocuous decision, I don't want to say like vanilla versus chocolate, but something more substantial within our human experience and I don't want to give examples. Maybe I'll leave that to you guys to talk about it. But in my experience, it always tends to go south, if you know what I mean, or down towards the bottom of the page that I had, because you start doubting yourself, you start second guessing, um, and it leads toward that sense of unworthiness, which is its whole other topic of itself. There's a long-winded way of saying the same thing. But unworthiness is probably, for personal growth, the most detrimental thing we can do ourselves. And it comes from a judgment. All right. Well, it keeps turning the thing off here. So uh, with that, that was actually the last slide.
Perfect.
So nobody stopped me or threw anything in, but I will throw it out to the crowd for input. I can bring the little drawing thing back up, or a PowerPoint slide, or we can just stare at each other's pretty faces.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to see each other's faces now and
And
open
have
up.
a conversation, right?
Yeah, so I feel like we could kind of start anywhere. If anybody wanted to jump in and find the jumping off point into discussion. Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Kent.
Yeah. Um, I have some ambivalent feelings about the word forgiveness. I know Ross says forgiveness ends the wheel of karma, right?
Mm.
Mhm.
But now, if I think of forgiving someone, mm, my interpretation of that word is that, okay, they did me wrong, but I forgive them. So it still seems to me or feels to me like I'm still judging them, but I'm good enough that I am forgiving them. So it feels like I'm placing myself above them somehow when I use that word forgiveness. I prefer to use the word to accept and appreciate what happened. If somebody did something involving me that I didn't like, rather than use the word forgiveness, uh, I want to seek to come to a place where I accept the experience and I appreciate the experience. So that's like my goal. That's what I seek. What do y'all think of that?
Sounds like you have some judgment around the word forgive.
Forgiveness. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, yeah. Good
Touche.
point.
Touche, Mika.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing that Mika just did, because if you're still calling it bad, and
Yeah.
um, I can't think anything off the top of my head from the rock contact that articulates what I'm thinking, but from the Sermon on the Mount it boils down to forgiveness means it didn't happen. There
Right.
was no good or bad.
So letting go. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it might just be a matter of redefining the word forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you, Kent, in terms of I think, colloquially, the way we can sometimes talk about forgiveness, it's like, I forgive you, and it can have that kind of connotation of like, you
Exactly.
did this bad thing, but I'm a good person and I forget, so
Yeah,
I
exactly.
have some aversion to that kind of, colloquial like interpretation of what forgiveness is also. So I think it can take some reclaiming. Yeah, go ahead, Mika.
Are you guys familiar with Ho'oponopono?
Yeah.
I really like that in the context of understanding what forgiveness can mean. I think in the less in the colloquial sense and more in the like what's possible in terms of forgiveness. Because that process for me makes me take ownership completely of both sides of my perceived self and perceived other self, both being responsible, or me having all of the responsibility within me and also the other self having whatever. Yeah. It's
Well,
not one-sided.
sounds like what you're saying is there's a gradation of things that we can call forgiveness, and like everything else, it runs the full spectrum from you can call something forgiveness, like West was talking about, but you're really using it to get some kind of power over that person, some kind of manipulative emotional influence. Like when you said, "Oh, I forgive you," that kind of thing is what West was talking about, versus the more sincere one is what I was trying to communicate. Where no,
Yeah, I was that what
yeah,
West was saying is also what I was trying to express. Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
oh, I'm done.
Oh, you're done. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I
Well,
have
okay. Go
two.
ahead.
Um, one is just a comment to Mika. If you're interested in creating a presentation on Ho'oponopono, I would love to hear your take on it sometime if that calls to you. Whether on Zoom or at some shared coming home or whatever.
I will consider that. Thank you.
Yes. And then also, in response to Scott's query about like, is there a way out of judgment? I think there is. And I think judgment, when judgment happens, it's not a personal thing. I don't think we really judge. In other words, like the appearance of separation and now there's two, and this one is better than that one. I don't think it's really what our true self does, although we can identify with those thoughts. Like I can either identify myself as the one that's better or the one that's worse and call that myself. And I think that's our free will to appear as though now I'm separate. Anyway, from my perspective and in my own explorations, the way, quote, out of judgment is to just allow those thoughts, those appearances to be without taking them personally, without thinking, I'm the one who's having that judgment, or, to need to identify the self as either part of that kind of equation. Rather, it's just kind of an appearance of mind. It's a part of the play of parent separation, but it isn't the whole of reality, if that makes sense.
That sounds like what you're saying is don't judge yourself for judgments that are passing through you, passing through your mind.
Don't take it personally.
Don't take it personally. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I find that contemplating judgments within myself is one of the most important tools I have on my path. It seems like more than anything, the catalysts that I encounter have to do with discovering what judgments I hold.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I was in a relationship that was pretty bad for 5 years, and but I learned so much from that relationship. It was incredible. I wrote a long list of lessons I learned from that relationship, and many of those lessons were about judgments that I held that I wasn't aware of, like subconscious judgments that I held subconsciously. That through that relationship, I became aware of them, which was very useful because then I could let them go. And for example, one of them was I realized I had a judgment of people who stayed in bad relationships and didn't leave. And I didn't understand why people didn't leave a bad relationship. And then I got to experience that relationship in that I had a really hard time leaving for like 5 years. So I got to experience what it was like to be in a bad relationship and not be able to leave it. And that made me aware of that judgment that I had held subconsciously. So yeah, discovering my judgments is an important part of my path, so I can let them go.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Diana's got her hand up.
Yeah. Diana. And also welcome, Nanette. Yeah, feel free to jump in, Diana.
Thank you, Scott, so much for sharing your presentation. It was a really helpful reminder to, oh yeah, forgiveness, staying in that Christ consciousness vibration.
A little bit hard for me to hear you.
Oh, okay, I'll come closer to my screen. I was just saying thank you. Thank you, Scott, for the presentation. It was really helpful to have the reminder of forgiveness and Christ consciousness and remembering compassion and trying to have the courage for compassion more often. And my question actually is for BJ, because when you were sharing about witnessing that where a person having judgment come through, do you have a practice that keeps you in that state of being? As I find it's really tricky when we are closely enmeshed with other humans. It's harder with those closer relationships to remember, oh yeah, I am just witnessing the influx of things coming and going and not getting attached to it. So I was wondering if you just are able to live in that state of awareness all the time, or do you have a practice that helps you remember that? So thank you, everyone.
I absolutely live in that state of consciousness all the time. 100%. I always know that all of my judgments are only passing illusions. No, definitely not. Definitely get caught up in the stories. But you probably have heard me, because most people have, talk about the work of Byron Katie, which it has been hugely impactful for me, and is, I think, a practice of, it's a spiritual practice of judging. Like one of the main parts of the form of the work of Byron Katie is filling out what's called a judge your neighbor worksheet. So you specifically write down your judgments, and it's really powerful, and it actually mirrors a lot of Ra's teachings in terms of like balancing the polarities. So yeah, it's a meditative practice of finding and welcoming thoughts. And I think that's been just that aspect of it has been hugely transformative to me, because I think we often tend to, like, things that are distasteful, we tend to like kind of, push them aside. And it's instead a practice of intentionally bringing them forward, pulling them out of the shadows. And also what I consider to be kind of a summary of that practice, which, I mean, there's so much to it. There's a whole lot of depth if you engage that practice. But what I consider to be at this point, like a summary of that practice is like, can I follow my own advice? And so in that way, all the judgment that I have out there of other people is always, if I utilize it, is always available to help grow me. Like every way that I want someone else to live shows me how to live my life, which I find to be incredibly nourishing. So it's yeah, the judgments when we use them that way, they turn out to be like nutrients.
Well, I hadn't thought of it that way. Well, you guys listen to it, but I found little room for judgments while they're occurring to be helpful towards where I want to go. And I don't know, maybe it was kind of loaded because when I first started thinking about it, it was within the context of Rod suggesting that we consider the non-efficacy of judgment. And that was in a specific case of judging the self. I'm not good enough. And then, then the whole unworthiness things happens. Now, once you recognize it, maybe that's where it goes down the path you were talking about, West, where it uncovers this sense of unworthiness that you have for yourself. And then it's like, oh, I don't have to do that. Because further up that ladder of all those words I had was choice. I could choose a different way to handle this, or a different way to think about it, I guess, a better way to say it.
I'll just say anytime, if anybody in our community ever gets curious about the work of Byron Katie and wants to talk about it or wants support in practicing it, it's totally my jam. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'll help you. I'll help you get started if you're curious, because for my personal growth, it was like rocket fuel.
Hmm.
So, definitely.
Yeah, I can tell you all that Wes is incredibly insightful and good at that work. And I'm pretty good at looking into myself and probing into myself and finding things, but West has an ability to see things that I miss. So she can be very helpful.
Yeah, I always liked her work. I didn't stick with it very long as it sounds like West did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not for everybody, that practice. It surely isn't for everybody, but
Yeah, I like that hard hitting, let's just get to the facts kind of thing.
yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
There's a guy named Peter Ralston that I follow his work too, and it's similar, but in some ways more foundational. It just gets down to the nuts and bolts of how we create our experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then Byron Katie's, okay, well, what are you going to do about that? If you're creating an experience that you don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Nanette has a question in the comments. Did I cut somebody off?
No.
Okay. Nanette says, this is a discussion regarding orange to indigo energetic band, worthy/unworthy affecting clarity via sixth chakra, lower and upper triads coordinating, correct? Catching up.
Well, you're gonna have to help me out there, Nanette. The only ray I mentioned was when I first started my doodling there. I briefly mentioned red ray as the foundation of how we build all this complex thing with words like decision or choice. I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but
Yeah.
assessment, discernment, discrimination, condemnation, righteousness or self-righteousness. Couple that with various emotions. And yeah, it's orange or maybe yellow. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, the orange band and the red and the seventh, like the first and the seventh, it's like an onion with the heart in the middle. And so the outer band is more like a sphere than a column energetically. This is how I've visioned it. And one way it was described through a teacher. So the first and the seventh rays, we don't really do much with them. We kind of live within them. I don't really know how to articulate that. But the second and the sixth, if you're coming in on this concentric circle, that would be the orange ray and the indigo ray. And there is a relationship there, because if you have obstruction or a lack of clarity in the orange ray, that's going to be reflected in your ability or one's ability to not meditate, but one's ability to comprehend beyond the body, or to connect with infinite intelligence, infinite energy. It interferes with that because you're unworthy. You're not recognizing yourself as God. So there is a distortion there of non-acceptance. So that interferes with that indigo ray functioning. And then consequently, you have the same sort of thing with the third, which is the yellow ray, and the fifth, which is the blue ray. And that's discernment, judgment, clear speech. And that going with relationship, that has a lot to do with living in the world. And in the middle is the heart chakra, because there are three on either side of it, you might say, if you looked at it as concentric circles or peeling an onion. So whenever I think of an area which is any area that needs work, I always try to find a correlation to that in the band that's affiliated with that particular chakra. And so if it was yellow chakra, I'd say, okay, where am I having trouble communicating? Where am I having trouble discerning? Or where am I having trouble having wisdom living in this yellow world? So it's that type of a dynamic. So it's an actual energetic band, apparently, metaphysically, in which those particular chakras have those relationships. And that's what I heard you talking, that when I opened this screen, I finally got to you all, I saw your algorithm, which is a lot like the notes I take. I could really relate to that because everything's kind of all over the place, but it also connects. And so I could read that pretty well. And I thought, oh yeah, and then that's what triggered the thought about you all talking about forgiveness, self-worth. And that's where I immediately thought of, okay, we're talking about the orange chakra, and that has to do with being able to step outside of yourself into, I guess, maybe a flow, an energetic flow or comprehension, but whatever you do through the sixth chakra, the form maker body, is deeply tied to that self when you're in the body. So, yeah, so you really, in fact, we were talking about that today in a class Adam Mace had, and it was talking about that. And so the same subject's been a thread through the day. So when I opened the screen, I thought, oh, great. I want to hear what you all have to say about this. So thank you for doing this presentation.
Oh, sure. And well, can I ask you to expand on a little bit because I understood and followed what you were talking about. Can you try to connect that with the idea of the forgiveness and
Well,
what that would do to that Orange Indigo band?
again, I just stopped in on this. So when you start talking about forgiveness, we are talking about a self feeling or needing to have some kind of compassion for either another self or the self. And so without that forgiveness, you're not going to have that clarity in your orange chakra because you're not going to be able to love yourself or love another until you understand whatever you need to know about forgiveness, which I think is something I certainly need to, it's an ongoing
Well,
part.
let me I brought the picture back up here, and so you got all the jumbled you and what your judgments and choices and decisions and discernments make. So kind of the left side is self, the right side turns into the other, because one of the fundamental things, and this was where I mentioned Red Ray, is I have to decide what's me and what's not me. He's in it all the way back to being just a tiny little baby. And then I got a little creator here in the upper left-hand corner. And then I drew a blue line here, but it's more of a softer gradation from the bottom to the top, from things that would take you further away, like a self-judgment of unworthiness over here in the lower left. And then I talked about how all this stuff, you could add layers and layers and layers on the outside of this, where you end up with a million different tentacles going potentially every different way. But most people, their personality takes them to take them in one particular direction. And then compassion, whether it's for the self or other, is it kind of puts a padded cell around the whole 3D experience, so it can't get any bigger. That was kind of the way I was reading this when I was contemplating it. And then forgiveness, I wrapped that up at the end, where, and I put kind of a mathematical term there. It's the reciprocal of the judgment, because if you get to a true, sincere forgiveness, where any catalyst and then experience that happened in here is forgiven, it's just something that happened. There is no, forget about judgment. There's not even a choice or a decision. It was just one blob of experience. And it basically, I came to the conclusion that it just short circuits the whole, the whole experience that you can get from judgment.
So you're saying forgiveness, if you are in a state of forgiveness, compassion arises?
No, I would say compassion comes first, and compassion is real to me. Just the compassion allows you to put a border around all of these thoughts and self judgments or judgments of others, or just
Oh,
in
okay.
general. It just it all it if there's any compassion involved anywhere in the experience, then it puts a boundary on it, so it can't wander too far from this core that I in a poor attempt to use your um, chakra analogies, is the heart. I would say, and forgiveness really just none of this can happen if you're in a state of forgiveness. You don't even the compassion isn't even necessary, because nothing happened if you go to that extreme state of unconditional.
Okay. I'm seeing what you're saying, because compassion could be the result of, you have to elicit compassion because you have to look into whatever you need to. Well, if you feel you need compassion for something, then it's a self saying, I have to not have a judgment. I have a judgment. But you're saying if you start with forgiveness, there's really no judgment to begin with. So compassion doesn't need to be there because it's sort of built in.
Yeah, that's why I said it just, to use an electrical term, it short circuits the whole experience, and it's like it didn't even happen, or won't happen. Although I don't know how forgiveness happens if beforehand.
Yeah. I'm
before
going to think
Catalyst.
about that. You know, like times when I felt that I needed to be forgiven or I need to forgive. And I'm going to revisit those times and look at that through this light. Yeah.
Okay.
That's nice. It's on it's on a north, south, east, west axis. I see where you got with your blue lines. I like that.
Okay, that just kind of was spontaneous.
Uh-huh.
Because I just started just you weren't here at the beginning, but I started this little creator dude, and then a little sun ray that created a little me, and then I started with this word self and just kind of expanded out from that using things like this: decisions, choices, assessments, et cetera, and then how those things get colored with the things on the right. That's really so you're caught up now.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think Kent had his hand up for a while too.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, many thoughts went through me as you were talking. So, Scott, you have been saying like several times, if we have forgiveness for something that happened, it's like it didn't even happen. I'm guessing you mean emotionally it didn't happen. I mean the experience, we still had the experience, right?
Yes,
So
we still had the experience, but
but
there's none of that
it's
charge left to it anymore.
it's emotionally neutral.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Nanette, for what you were saying. I have known for a long time that there's an association with orange and indigo
Oh,
to worthiness. Yeah, that worthiness has orange and indigo have a relationship to worthiness. But the picture you drew was very helpful. You know, like the heart in the middle and the circles around it. Uh,
uh,
I hadn't heard that before, so that was very helpful. Thank you for that.
you're welcome. This is not original. I believe it was one of Scott Mandelker's discussions. I don't know if it was
Okay.
direct with raw material or something else, maybe Buddhist, but that's where that concept, he elucidated that concept. And that was very helpful to me as well. So thanks. I'm glad it was helpful.
Okay, one third thing.
Yeah.
One spiritual material that I've studied is by Johnny King. She's from New Zealand. She channels an entity called Ptah, which is very interesting because, you know, it's another Egyptian name. P apostrophe T-A-A-H.
Okay.
And it's another social memory complex. I find it very similar to the Law of One material in many ways. Anyway, one thing they say is, you know, humans are judgmental, and they work a lot with, she does workshops and stuff, or she used to, I don't know if she does anymore. One thing they work with is to discover the judgments we hold so we can release them. But an important aspect of that is not to judge ourselves for having judgments. Because if we discover that we have judgments and then we judge ourselves for having the judgments, it's like adding another layer to the onion. Instead of peeling away a layer over the onion, we add another layer to the onion if we judge ourselves for having judgments. So what I like to do on my spiritual path is to simply explore my mind and see if I can explore my subconscious to discover what judgments I hold. But then I try not to judge myself when I discover those judgments. I just simply become aware of them and then go, aha. And then, you know, I release them or let them go. I might, if it's hard to let them go, I might have to say some invocation. You know, I might have to speak it out loud that I let this judgment go. Usually I don't need to, though. Usually it's just a matter of becoming aware of it. And as I become aware of it, I can simply let it go. So that's my 2 cents. Or it might have been more than 2 cents.
Letting go sounds a lot like what you're calling letting go sounds a lot like forgiveness to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What was the name of this person that does the channeling, please?
Johnny King.
Okay.
She has 2 books. The first book is called An Act of Faith. And the second book, I think, is Transformation of the Species.
Hmm.
And I
Okay.
found it to be very similar to the Law of One material. I actually translated the first book into Swedish.
Oh,
Yeah, took a long time. I didn't realize how much work it was to translate a whole book, but it was a great learning experience.
well, I'll look her up. Or is it a he? She.
She, yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Johnny King. So the first name is spelled Jani.
Oh, okay. I had spelled the male. Okay, I got you. Thank
Right.
you.
You're welcome. Oh, and if you get the books, get the newer edition because
No, get the
it's in.
Swedish translation. No, just
I want
Huh?
your translation.
What's that?
I
get
want
the
your
Swedish
translation.
translation.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
here.
Swedish translation. No. But see, okay, it's an interesting story. Her Australian publisher, when she first published the books, he added some stuff to the material, and she wasn't aware of it for a long time. But there was there were some things in there, some paragraphs in there that she thought sounded strange, like they didn't come from Ta. And then she went back and listened to the audio and compared the audio to what was in the book. And she discovered that the publisher had added some stuff. And those were the exact same things that when I translated the book into Swedish, I had serious reservations about those parts because they didn't sound right. But I still translated them and kept them in the Swedish version of the book. But yeah, so get the second edition of the books if you're gonna get them, because she's taken out the stuff that the Australian publisher added to the first edition.
Oh, okay.
Did you get that?
I did hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
The
good.
second edition. That's the summary.
Yeah, right.
Edition. Yes.
Can you put her name again? Just put it in the chat. That might
Yeah, I can do that.
So we're nearing the end of our allotted time. I'm curious if there's any final insights or comments, thoughts on judgment. Yeah, Mika.
This might just be more judgment. But as I was contemplating this grass, it looks to me like, and it follows also in my personal experience that there's a feeling associated with judgment that is kind of effortful. It takes effort to maintain separation, and it takes more effort to maintain a sense of righteous imbalance that comes with an assessment where I'm less and you're more, or vice versa. It feels like there's more effort required the further you get into the bottom right hand side, and less effort required the higher you get on the left hand side. Anybody want to look at that?
That sounds really insightful to me. I think maintaining the illusion of separation does take a lot of work. And also paradoxically, in a way, so does living in the truth of our nature. It's less effort in a way to live the truth, but it also requires kind of the effort of spiritual practice and living in faith. Anyway, that's what it inspires in me.
It's 8:30.
Oh, my goodness.
Let's
Yeah.
hear Aaron.
Aaron had his hand up before the buzzer.
Yeah, thanks. Got it right
Okay.
under the wire.
We're
Yeah,
going
that's really
overtime.
interesting. Mika, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I think to me it just kind of brings to mind you're noticing there brings to mind that all distortions require effort.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
it's what a distortion is. Like anything that the creator wants to produce in the simulator of space-time requires effort.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad, whether it's positive or negative, it requires effort. And so
Mhm.
certainly judgment is one of those things that requires effort.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That resonates for me.
Great point. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other closing remarks? Or shall we be complete?
I just want to say I'm happy to have witnessed that little smooch you just received on your head, Mika. That was really sweet.
Totally.
That's it. Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. That was a great presentation.
Yeah. Thanks for providing the catalyst for this conversation. And thank
All
you.
right. Well, thanks for listening. This is a small favorite group for this kind of thing.
Mm,
The regulars.
A very important topic. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. And
Yeah.
thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
It's so nice.
Well, let's close with a little mini prayer. Go out as we came in. Thank you to those guides and allies, all of the invisible support that was with us for this call. Thank you for all of the benefit received, the upgrades, the new understanding. And may the benefit that we've received through this conversation, through this time together, radiate out and support the entire Earth Collective at this time. Yeah, anyone who's open to learning from judgment and transforming judgment into positive expression, may that be even more available to you than before. Thank you again to our invisible support. Thank you, friends, for gathering. And as always, thank you to the One. Amen.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye, beauties.
Hi, beauties.
Bye, everyone.
We'll
Have a
see
good
you.
session. Yes. Bye.
Bye.